Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm delighted to be joined, and we've already done the intro, so I'm delighted to be joined by Sufia, Maria, Matt, and Danny to talk about the findings, as we've all just heard them. It's really important to hear from all of you because we've all got different sort of lived experiences that relate to some of the biggest data points that we've seen today. And two of you were really involved, pivotal in the work that we did on the All in Action plan. For anyone that doesn't know, all the actions, all 9 were developed by people with relevant lived experience. And we've met, dozens of times over the last 2 years, so massive appreciation for that. I'm also conscious there was a slide that was missing, which is why I was sort of running back and forward. So we're going to show that at some point for anyone that does want to take a picture of it. It was around sexual discrimination and sexual harassment figures. There it is. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but there is a really good news story in that in 2021, sexual harassment, even though we were a year into the lockdowns, and we were actually in a lockdown when we did the survey, sexual harassment was still prevalent, and we had 3% of women and 2% of men saying that they'd experienced sexual harassment during the 12 months of lockdown. And we kind of expected it to go up when we did the new census because we're all back in the office. But in fact, it's gone down to 1% of women and 1% of men. So it's a really good news story, and I didn't want to lose that in the fact that we didn't have the slide. So, but I think Sue Todd from NABS is going to be talking about that a little bit more later on, so we'll pick up on it. So that's that. Back to our discussion. Sufia, if I can start with you. We have seen a really small but positive increase in the experience sort of percentages of Asian talent in the industry. Why do you think that is? And can you tell us a bit more about your experience being in the working group?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sharon. Great question. There is an improvement, and we'll take it. And I think it's always good to see progress, especially that it's matched with actions. And I think Advertising Association really put a spotlight on the Asian experience, unlike it'd never been done before. And it suddenly gave us an opportunity and a platform to talk about the Asian experience. Now, you have to kind of take a step back and think, Asians, there's conditioning that we come in with. One of that is we are a bit apologetic about owning our experiences. What Advertising Association did in partnership with Media for All, MIFA, was it allowed us to create a space, a platform, to own the Asian experience, to get a bit uncomfortable. There were moments between, the sessions that we shared, Sharon, where it got a bit sticky, felt a bit messy. How does our good look like? In the absence of not having that previously, it suddenly felt like a new space. It was important that we came to the actions that we did decide on, which was about, lead with curiosity. And that's all about listening. Ask the questions, don't assume. It's about the equity. Meet people where they want to be met. We often, I think we've moved away from the term BAME for all the right reasons, but there was a lot of discussion about what does that actually mean? Even when you talk about Asians, there is not just one group we're referring to. So I loved the first action, which was about lead with curiosity, explore, listen, lean in, and be willing to learn and understand what people need. Obviously, there's some, quick changes that we can all make in our organizations and workplaces, which is about having an inclusive working environment where everyone feels there is a sense of safety and belonging. It's not exclusive to Asians, it's for everyone. And I think there's always that collective shift. You do it in one space, everyone else sees and comes forward. And often the work that I lead on in the organizations I work for, I can be talking about, one thing, but actually suddenly a whole group of other people come forward and say, hey, can I talk about this as well with you? And that's incredible. It's such a powerful moment as a culture for organization to drive. So it's all those things. It's about having that, having a prayer room, or not always assuming that everyone drinks when we're meeting for social connects, and having those opportunities where people are, coming together, be it through an employee resource group or just, community building. But I just wanted to add as well in all of this is be mindful that when we talk about, the positive progress that we're making, how do we sustain that? How do we retain that? So whilst we've kind of put a spotlight, I think we've got a bit of a challenge now to say, okay, how do we? And that might have come with some of the other working groups. It's like, okay, we've put a spotlight on this. How do we keep making the progress? And just a final point, there is occupational segregation that exists within our industry, and we were talking about this in our briefing call. It's, do our post rooms look like our boardrooms? And I know we don't really have post rooms right now, but we have IT rooms, and you get the gist of what I'm trying to get at here. It's about, is diversity reflected across all the levels, or is there just diversity in our support teams? When we call IT for help, you will often get, I think 99% of the time, I can say with experience, you will get a man, and most likely a person of colour. We're okay with them fixing our machines, but we're not okay with them sitting around a boardroom table and making decisions.
Yes.
How do we break, open that up, space up around, where decisions are being made? So I think, just to conclude, incredible experience working with yourself, working with mFUSE, collaborating in partnership, really putting a spotlight and putting this front of the agenda. For me, it's about how do we keep that progress in the right way, and hopefully the next year the results, incredible already, but it'll keep improving.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to change the order slightly and go on to Maria, because especially as we're sitting this way. But black respondents are still reporting a higher level of discrimination. Although we've seen that improvement since 2021, it's still the highest level of all ethnic groups. And they're also the largest percentage of people that are likely to leave the industry.
Yes.
Why is that?
I'm going to speak to my experience, because clearly I'm a black woman. And my career spans sort of 20 years, just over 20 years. And I have only had one promotion, one notable promotion and pay rise. And I had to take my own career into my own hands. And the way that I did that was that I would go to other companies with, better job description, better job title and money. And that's how I've managed my career over the last sort of 20 years. I run Lollipop Mentoring, and it is a mentoring platform for mid-level black women. And the aim is to get them into leadership roles. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing from them is that it echoes the results today, which is that they feel like they aren't going to get the promotions in the roles that they're in. So they too are doing the same thing. And they're not putting up with the stuff that I would be putting up with when I was younger. A lot of them have their own side hustles, they're very entrepreneurial, and if they see something or they smell something that doesn't seem right, they're not doing it. And I think there's lots of kind of performative posts on social media, we're doing this is great, this is amazing. And a lot of talent, they don't, from my experience now, mentees, they don't really believe it. So what they'll do is they'll find ingenious ways in asking questions. So they'll go on LinkedIn and they'll find people who work at those organizations and they'll go, what's your experience? What do you think? Oh, this is a bit smelly. This doesn't seem like, there's nobody at board level, there's nobody who's in those senior roles. It's unlikely that I'm going to get into that senior role. So what I'll do is I'll do it for 2 years, and then I too will move on. Or I will, in a few years, I will have a plan for my own career, and I will then, turn my side hustle into something which is going to, sustain them and sustain their families and move out of it. Because a lot of people now, a lot of black people, are taking their careers in their own hands because they don't have that trust. And I think there is something that everybody here needs to really think about, and that is building trust. If people are leaving your business, why are they leaving your business? What are they saying about your businesses? Because people talk. They talk, and you have to think about your reputation, not just what it looks like on LinkedIn. And I think as well, people really need to think about the mental health side of this, because people are really kind of prioritizing their mental health and they're just not putting up with it. And it's good that there's been a slight change, but it's not enough. And organizations also need to realize that it's not just a good thing to do. Companies perform better if they retain, ethnic talent. And that's just not really happening. And I think there is just a huge job to be done, as I said, in building trust.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you, keeping those, lots of initiatives were set up sort of post George Floyd's murder and the BLM movement, and I think it's sustaining those initiatives is a big part of that trust.
Yes.
You know, it's just a kind of watch out, I suppose, for anyone that's, you know, moving on to possibly something else.
Yes.
Because I'm sure that's sort of fundamental in that
I think
breakdown
so.
of trust.
I think so, and I think it's really about, it's one thing to say we've got these initiatives, but how is it translating? If you look into a company, you might see lots of diverse talent at these levels here, but what's happening over here? You know, where are those figures? And also how, we're talking about, you know, we have gender pay gap reporting, but we don't have ethnicity pay gap reporting. That's not right. You know, who's taking the baton? Who's arguing that? Who's pushing that forward? I think it's being tabled at the moment, but it's just not great. I think we need to look at things like that. I think we need to look at salary banding in terms of positions to make sure, you know, that those disparities, you know, they don't continue. Because people don't feel like things are fair.
And that's all part of the trust thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Is to kind of walk the talk.
Very much so.
Well, we'll come back around, but Matt, coming on to you, on social mobility, I mean, in terms of representation, it's one of the things we really fall down on. It's sort of half of the UK working population. Against the UK working population, it's half of that. And I just wonder why you think that's still an issue. I mean, the numbers are pretty much the same as they were in 2021. We struggle to recruit people from working class backgrounds. And the data, unfortunately, well, positively, says that once they're in the industry, they really enjoy a career. The retention levels are much higher. So I'm just wondering what you think the reasons for that.
I'm not massively surprised, if I'm completely honest. I mean, we are a bit of a class-ridden society, after all. We're very, very hierarchical. You know, I've been asked many times, you know, what school did you go to? What did your parents do? Stuff like that. Like, I don't really understand how that's relevant to whether I can do the job or not, but, you know, apparently it is. And, you know, I think that we've just got these structures in place that make it very, very difficult for working class people to sort of break through. Arguably, class is the last acceptable form of discrimination. You know, we still see it as regular jokes on TV and elsewhere. That said, I think it's worth stressing that, you know, as an industry, we are doing better than many other sort of areas of employment. You know, the MP has gone now. If you look at the current cabinet, that's 65% went to fee-paying schools. About 45% of journalists went to fee-paying schools. Actually, the one area that does very well is footballers, 5%, which is more or less reflective of the population. And maybe why it's the people's game, and you know, it's the one game that we can love. So I think there's some significant issues in the way in which we're sort of structured, and we just make it very, very difficult for people to get through or people to break through. I think the one thing that I've noticed is that there's been some pushback from organisations that I've worked in and have spoken to about the way in which we kind of measure what social mobility or class actually is. And I think that's one of the challenges. You know, we've seen some progress, you know, some progress. It's relatively slow, but seen some progress in the All-In Summit. You know, the Google data suggests that we're making progress as well in across ethnicity, across disability, across gender. But we don't measure social mobility in the same way. We don't look at, you know, the background of individuals in quite the same way. And, you know, there's almost like a sort of a patronising assumption that intersectionality is going to resolve that. And I just find that incredible, that, you know, that should be the answer. We know that when we set targets, you know, when we measure the data, we've got a really good opportunity, really good chance of actually moving the data along, make people accountable for specific stuff. So I think, you know, it starts from that. It starts from every organisation thinking about how they actually set targets for social mobility and for class, just generally, and starting to hold themselves to account. There's like, you know, I don't need to sort of go through all of it just yet, because I'm sure we're going to sort of talk more broadly, but there's a whole bunch of things in there around, you know, hiring, around development, around progression, around education within a business that we can do, and it's, you know, it's relatively straightforward. And to the points that we've raised already, we know that organisations that do have a diverse mix of talent, whether that's from an ethnicity perspective or whether it's from a class perspective, are significantly more successful. And I think, if you look at the industry that we're in, we're in the creative industries effectively, and so much of culture comes from working class backgrounds. And so, how as an industry can we really understand what's happening culturally if we're not really doing everything that we can to understand a lot more about, how working class people will sort of interact within a business, the ideas that they bring in order to drive our businesses forward, etc., etc.
I think that's really interesting. I think that challenge around the recruitment process is probably the first start, because I was really struck by Dame Caroline talking about what EY were doing with the neurodiversity programme, just completely flipping how you recruit people, because everyone, well, we're all different, as Ben said much earlier on. No two women are the same, no two black people are the same. We all think and respond differently, and I think the recruitment process is very cookie cutter. Yeah, particularly for certain sectors in the industry.
I mean, look, we've got, it's bizarre, we've got a massive talent shortage. We talk about it, it's the IA all the time. We've got a massive talent shortage in the industry. And yet if you take fee paying, non-fee paying, we're 7% is fee paying. It says 93% of the population didn't go to a fee paying school. Are we doing enough to really outreach to areas that perhaps have been left behind? Without sort of going on a bit of a rant. I don't want to go too extreme, but we've got divisions in society at the moment, and what is the responsibility of a part of the industry, or part of industry as we are, that's so influential across for so many different people, to actually have a much more front foot approach into kind of reaching out to parts of society that actually feel left behind. And Brexit was arguably caused by that. So I think we've got a great opportunity to use the expertise that we've got within the industry to just do a much better job of making more parts of society aware of the opportunities that exist, the kind of the excitement and the career prospects that are here. Potentially, in some instances, helping out on a financial perspective, because I think, I've heard stories of people who, were asked to go to an interview but didn't have any money for a suit or for the train ticket. So, how can we do a better job of making sure that those are not barriers that people experience anymore? So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that we could do around hiring and recruitment.
Brilliant. And we will pick up on that in a bit. Danny, coming to you. Feels like you're miles away over there. Huge panel. With disabled talent, it'd be great to hear a bit more about your personal experience as well, because it's an evolving, very much evolving for you. We've seen that representation, is low anyway, and pretty much is even less than the UK working population. And although fewer people are likely to leave the industry, and about 3/4 are happy where they work, they've got much higher work-related stress than the industry average. And so it'd be great to hear from you, with your own experience, how you think that works.
Again, based on personal experience, I have a progressive neurological condition. I've been in the business almost 30 years. I've had the condition for 20 years. And only in the past 2 years, I've become what you'd call, I suppose, life-alteringly disabled. And having been in the business for 30 years, I've seen 3 wheelchairs. This is the 4th. That's not right. So the point about disabled people finding it stressful, I think I'm finding life being disabled is quite stressful. To come here, can I get in? It's a step-free access, there's a toilet nearby. So every person in their offices has the same questions. And diverse, we're a broad group, so neurodiverse to physically disabled, invisible to visible. So I think what we need to do as employers is create an environment where everybody, no matter what the disability, can tell you about it. And then the companies can do whatever it takes to make their lives easier. And I think the difference to some of the marginalised groups is it's more than about attitude, it's about investment. So do you need a stair lift again? Do you need to get rid of the steps? Do you need more disabled toilets? And that's investment rather than attitude shift. So I think I'm not surprised people find it stressful, because once you're out of a controlled environment, it's tricky. So I'm not surprised.
And how do you find, has it been a positive journey for you in terms of the adaptations that have needed to happen at your workplace?
Yeah,
has that been a challenge?
It's been brilliant. Yeah, it's been brilliant. But I've been at 30 years. I've been at 3 years. I might not be so vocal. I might not be so open. I might not be so influential. So my company's made it happen really brilliantly, but I'm not sure that's typical.
Yeah.
I think people are shy to say, I didn't like having a walking stick, never mind 2 sticks, never mind a wheelchair. And once I'm over that ableist hurdle, I'm going, this is me now. I think people are very shy about, because often disability equals inability for many people.
I think that's
and it doesn't. It's just not true,
I think that's it, because again, when Dash shared the findings this year, it sort of echoes what we saw in 2021, that people are just not telling their companies quite often that they've got a condition or a disability. For fear that it's going to impact. And I think women have struggled with that for years anyway. People used to not tell anyone they were pregnant for a start, decades ago. So I feel like that's the big question for the industry. How can we create a workforce where people feel able to say, this is what I'm going through in my life?
And particularly for invisible conditions.
Yeah.
This is obvious. But invisible conditions are harder, I suppose, to navigate.
I mean, what I found really striking, it wasn't that in our pre-call, it was another conversation we had about the positive. You said that actually the hybrid working and the flexibility we have now has extended your career, which is a real plus for, I know we're going to talk later about hybrid working and the challenges and the pros and cons, but actually for people like you, where, and I've worked with somebody as well who really benefits from having that accessibility and flexibility. So we mustn't forget that as well. Yeah,
I'm good on Zoom. You can't see this bit. But people are surprised when they see the wheelchair. They go, I never knew. Well, why would you know? But I think video calls have extended the careers of disabled people because you don't need to be out and about so much, which is brilliant.
Yeah. I was really, when we had our pre-call and then we had a subsequent conversation, one of us, the word psychological safety came up a couple of times, and I wasn't that familiar with it, but it's clearly something that you discuss in your role, Sufia. You mentioned it as well, Maria. I'd love to speak to all of you about that, because I think it's a follow-on from what we're talking about people feeling they're able to identify, especially when it's non-visible differences. So tell us a bit more about, what it is, and how businesses and individuals can really play their part in that.
Shall I start? I think it's to all of us. Right?
Yeah, everyone. I'm not going to go down. Everyone, just feel free to discuss.
So I can start. I think in order to be, we talk about authenticity. It's a term we've become so familiar with. But what does it mean to be fully authentic? Now, not everyone has access to being fully themselves in the workplace, right? And I guess psychological safety is a condition that you drive through your culture within the workplace, where it's an enabler of you to step into your own, whatever that may be, whatever identity you want to be seen as. And in the absence of that, we work in the creative advertising industry. Creativity is our currency. And if you are having to code switch and you're not being fully yourself, you'll do well. I've been there. I did well in my previous role. I was in business development before I stepped into the world of talent development, and then ED&I, inclusion, equity, and diversity. I was doing well. I was on a good career trajectory, but I wasn't fully me. I wasn't thriving. I was in a job, but not in a career that I was passionate about. It wasn't connected to my inner self, and there was that disconnect between, I'm doing well, I'm adding to, the commercial success of the business. It looks good, but yet there was a misalignment in terms of what it is that what was my legacy? What is it that I want? What is the impact I wanted to make in the world? And I think it's that third space where if you step into an environment, into a culture where you feel included, you feel seen, you feel heard, you feel you're valued, your contribution matters. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's through steps. And a lot of this exists in the non-verbal cues as well as some of the systemic changes and barriers that exist in organizations. So, that for me is so critical. And I think organizations, I feel fortunate I work for, and currently my current organization, Wunderman Thompson, there's a lot of investment in that space because it is new, you're right. Firstly, what does it mean? How do we get there? What is the psychological contract you have with your line manager?
Yeah.
How does that work? How does that flow? How does that show up? How do I feel safe to say, hey, I can't make that 9:15 meeting because as a single mom, I have to do the school run with 3 kids in 3 separate schools. Can I have that conversation? And when I have it, how is it met? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's about exploring that and really investing in that space. But I think my fellow panelists might have other things to add.
I think for me, there's psychological safety, and to your point, you know, if I can I confide in my line manager if I've got an issue, and then there's bringing your whole self to work. People ask me, you know, how do you bring your whole self to work? And I have to say, it really depends on where you work because it's not always met with positivity. And also you need to look and see, well, when you say bring your whole self to work, do you mean also be professional in bringing your whole self to work? So there's a piece around that. But psychological safety for me is being able to have a very honest and clear dialogue about what you feel is not going right, and what you would like to see changed, and vice versa, okay? Without there being implications, oh my gosh, I'm not sure about her, she's got a bit of an attitude, she's a little bit aggressive, or, you know, and that's what it is. Can you go and speak to your line manager or come to your business and be honest and have an open dialogue? That's psychological safety for me. That's my definition of it.
Yeah, interesting.
The whole self-to-work thing, I mean, it always makes me laugh. If I was at work the way I was at Spurs with my mates, I'd be tired on the spot. So I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon. I think cut that from the video. I think just to add to what we've said so far, I think it's that a lot of it for me comes back to inclusivity and feeling included and feeling heard and feeling like you are making a difference and you've got a voice, and everyone's got different ways of showing up. And everyone's got different ways of contributing. And so just being really, really kind of understanding and clear about, you know, how people are different and how they want to contribute, and, like, you know, making sure that you do give them the space for that. And I think, you know, there are specific programs that I think we need to do more of in order to make sure that certain groups are feeling, you know, that much more included. We had some data a little while ago where black women were much more likely to feel like they couldn't progress and couldn't contribute to the business than any other group. I mean, it was so stark how far back it was. And so, you know, I'm not suggesting that we've got it sorted, but there's things. I mean, there's a program we've got which is called The Collective, which is a 6-month onboarding program for black nooglers. Noogler is new to Google. And, like, you know, the results that we see from that, and, you know, the way in which the people who've been on that program feel about the business, feel about their ability to contribute and actually be successful at the business, gone through the roof. And so, you know, so how do we do that at scale? How do we do that across different groups that we have within the business? How do we make sure that everyone feels that that they are included, they are being heard, that they've got that ability to succeed? And I think, you know, it's by testing programs like that, which I think are the way that we can actually start to learn and drive that change.
Yeah, brilliant. Danny?
I guess the only thing I'd add is, you know, if I'm out with my mates or my wife, sometimes the wheelchair, but more on a mobility scooter, people think I can't talk. So can he do that? Can he go in there? Can he do it? They ask them, not me. And that's because of the point I made before. People think disability equals inability. And as long as that's in society, it's really hard for disabled people to bring them whole selves to work. So I think that's all of us to change that. That's why we're here, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, certainly as one of amongst the oldest in the room and definitely oldest on the panel, I'll speak for women over a certain age because, again, totally underrepresented in the industry. It's sort of 5% over 55. You mentioned code switching, and I think that's just something you just innately do. And I'd really love to see a challenge around how women, you know, can show up in the workplace. Because I find myself now in a sort of care sandwich. So having done parenting and I've got adult sons now, I'm still a carer for my eldest who's autistic, but my parents are older now. So I'm kind of looking, that's looming, you know, with parents in their 80s and 90s. And I think that's what I'd like to see is that real change around how women can, you know, as you go through all of life's challenges, because everybody does, how you can express those. And it's great to see that, you know, that feedback around menopause. I mean, for me, being long past menopause as well, I'd love to see a policy that encompasses all of those things. So it's not specific to one, it's just an ageing policy. Because I think, you know, chronic health conditions, disability, caring for other people are things that we all sort of have to look into and play our part in. It's men as well.
Age is a really interesting one. in this industry in particular. You know, the next, whether it's right or not, the next US election is likely to be fought by two men who are around 80. And yet, in our industry, you get past 50 and it's like washed up. And you know, it's just, you know, how do we reevaluate the skills that are being offered by different groups? But yeah, ageism is, I think it's a huge issue in the industry.
Yeah.
We're not really tackling it enough.
Well, it's a massive stereotype as well. I think the ageism is kind of innate. But I always believed until I got to an older age that people just got expelled from the industry somehow. You know, there's just like the machine that just turns you out at 45.
Yeah.
And actually looking, and the data supports this, people are making a choice not to work in advertising after 45, particularly women. And I think because you're just like this barrage of responsibility in other areas of your life. And it's a choice thing. I'll just work more locally, 9 to 5. And that's a shame because, like you say, we've got this talent issue and we want to be able to retain talent at all levels and all backgrounds.
But are we looking at that in a different way? Because obviously the assumption is that you started your career, you then get older and then you leave. But what about people who are older who want to come into the industry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge sea change. And
Returners,
that's what we should be looking at.
Absolutely. And people with talent from other industries as well, because that's something we're looking at now. I've only got a few minutes left, and I've got a quick fire question to you to bring it back to us as individuals, because we've talked a lot about what companies can do and what the industry can do. What's the one thing, not necessarily based on the data you've seen, but just one thing that you're thinking you'll change this year that you're going to do differently? Anyone?
I think I'm probably going to be a little bit more empathetic because I think that's a wider conversation. If you look on social media, there's lots of things about men are this, women are this, etc., and it's quite diverse. But I think that listening to some of that, you kind of understand really what a lot of men are feeling and how they are expected to show up in societies. And as a black woman, it's like, oh, your whole thing and who you are is all around being a black woman. It's like, no, we're human first. And it's all about people. And so being more empathetic to others.
That's brilliant. Do I have to follow that?
What she said. Just say what she said.
I think spending more time with other organisations who are experts in this space. You know, I don't know how familiar everyone is with I mean, it's a small group, an organisation called Common People, which is a bunch of people in the industry. You know, a guy called Jed Hallam set it up at Snap, and like, you know, organisations like that are really kind of going deep under the issues that exist, the reason why they exist, and then coming up with sensible ways that organisations can get involved to adopt those policies and then just drive them forward. So, you know, spending more time trying to understand around businesses like Common People and others, because there's a lot of them.
Brilliant.
I'm going to pinch an idea from somebody I met recently who works for a consultancy called Bridge 06, which looks at disabled representation and experience in the production industry, TV production industry in particular. And she explained that for every production that happens, she's encouraging the companies to ask their cast and their crew if they have access needs. So I'm using that for my work, asking every new client who comes to our agency, have you got access needs? Because it makes the person asking the question think about their business, as well as it makes it easy for people to come into the industry. So everyone should ask their visitors, their officers, have you got access needs? One thing.
And I think mine is a bit more, I mean, I feel like I'm amongst very nice people. And mine is a bit more self-centered. I'm looking around the room and I can see there is a lack of representation of people like me. And, you know, that's uncomfortable. And I think for me this year, the focus is, how do I step into my power, and how does that enable others to step in? How does that empower others to step into their own? It doesn't have to be everyone has to look like me. This is not about that. It's about how is it everyone feels empowered to own their identity in the best way they want to own it, and use that as their channel to get to their next, you know, whatever it is you talked about. I mean, when you talked about the lack of access to opportunity and progression, that makes me uncomfortable. So how is it, you know, through my experiences, I can empower others to step into their own. So I think it's about where, you know, you, in the flight, you know, say wear the mask first, and then you save others. It's like, how do I diversify the representation of this industry so I inspire more people who don't feel they're included, that don't feel they have access, to say, no, you know, absolutely you do. So it's about empowering myself to empower others.
That's brilliant. I love that. I was going to say in the 13 seconds we've got left, I was just going to say I'm going to have meaningful conversations with people. I really miss the conversations we had at the beginning of lockdown. You know, those calls you'd go on, Teams, Google, Meet, obviously all the platforms available, Zoom, and everyone spent the first 10 minutes asking, you know, where you were, how your family were, how you're feeling, and I really miss that because I actually got to know people in the industry so much better in that first sort of 3 months. So, literally, it's flashing, so that's good. I think we did a good job there on time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Danny,
you.
Matt, Maria.